Our next philosopher and theory comes in the form of Ludwig Wittgenstein, and his theory of language games, which is a form of linguistic nominalism. Wittgenstein lived from 1889 to 1951, and he was a student of both Frege and Russell. Now, early on, Wittgenstein had a version of direct realism or linguistic realism as his chief theory of language. But in his later philosophy, he completely reversed his position. He developed what is called the use theory of meaning, which says that language's meaning is derived from how we use it, right? More or less. Now, before we get into that, it should be noted that the concerns of early Wittgenstein and a lot of the intuitions largely remained the same, or at least the important ones in many respects did. Between Wittgenstein, who wrote, the young Wittgenstein who wrote the Tractatus LogicoPhilosophicus, which is TLP for short, which was the work where he agreed with more or less with his teachers, and the later Wittgenstein who wrote Philosophical Investigations, which was published 2 years after his death, right, and was not a finished work. It should be noted that he's one of a very minority of philosophers. A small minority of philosophers, we're talking like you can count them on one hand, who in their lifetime had two radically different philosophical positions, almost completely contrary. And to my knowledge, he's the only one whose works were essentially revolutionary in both respects, right? His Tractatus LogicoPhilosophicus became an inspiration to the way math and science were pursued for for about 2 decades, right? And his his philosophical investigations were the foundation for ordinary language philosophy, which became one of the major dominant forces in philosophy and early early linguistics, for about 2.5 decades after his death. Right? So he is a monster. I call him the Beast. Right? It's not an official nickname, but it should be. Right? Anyway, his use theory of meaning, right, is focused on the idea of the use theory of meaning he presents in the Philosophical Investigations is centered on his idea of language games. Right? Now, language games are, simply put, the idea that the only thing that allows sentences to have meaning are those conventions of speech, right? That we engage in language, we use language under certain sets of broad rules, right? Much like how we play games. Right? Now, think of it this way. Even what we call a game is something that's ill-defined, right? What is a game, right? Sure, you can come up with a list, but here are some things that count as games. Tag, football, baseball, chess, sorry, Spyro, right? Backgammon, the game, congratulations, you lost, and battleship, Bop It, right? All these things are games. They have what in common, though? They're fun. The game isn't fun. The game is frustrating. Right? The whole purpose of the game is to lose, so that does away with there are winners and there are losers. Right? They're competitions. Bop It's not a competition. It's something you can play solo. Right? I mean, I suppose you could think of it as competing against yourself, but why bother? Solitaire's a game. That's certainly not a competition. If it was, it'd be a very, very lonely one, and you might want to see a doctor if you're considering solitaire a competition. So this this is the same principle that's at work with the idea of language games, that we have various conventions of speech, things like questioning, things like a student-teacher relationship, the relationship in the classroom, and how dialogue proceeds there versus how you interact with friends, right? That, different language is used in different ways amongst different groups because it's used for different purposes. So these conventions constitute the rules by which we engage in conversation. And things only make sense in relation to these rules. Right? And for the most part, actual objects that we refer to aren't really these things, he wants to say. Right? Words only have meaning and power, or concepts only have any sort of definition because we've granted them this understanding through use. This is what he calls family resemblance. Right? And it's the idea that something can be similar, that there can be a whole host of things that fall under a category, right, or concept, such as games, right, that are ill-defined. There's enough in common in a vague sense that we understand solitaire, chess, and baseball to all be games, even if they're not the same kind of game. Right? We can understand Bop It to be a game. Right? It's because we group similar things we group things according to their likenesses that that we call them by a similar term. There's nothing functionally that makes them fundamentally. Sorry, there's nothing fundamentally that makes them a game. Right? It's just that we use the term in this way, and we include them. We include those things. If we were to change how we used words, then we would change what fit in with the family concept, right? Or the family members of the concept. Right? Uh, so this is what's called nominalism. Right? Uh, Essentially, all meaning in language is a matter of training. Right? Not a matter of fact. Right? It's not like we refer directly to things by language because it makes direct reference to the actual objects, but through use, we refer. Right? The language itself doesn't pick out the objects. The way we use the language picks out the objects. Right? Nothing more, nothing less. Right? So language is a matter of training, not a matter of fact. Right? We focus on similarities based on our preferences, right? And then name what they have in common. Right? We rely on family resemblances for a lot of our communication. A good way of thinking about this is cultural differences and considerations of color. Right? They in Dutch they call they call cows red. It's brown to us. Right? In Japan, there was an experiment that was done this way. Children were told, there were Japanese children and Japanese American children raised apart, right? And there were first generation and second generation Japanese American children in the other one, right? and these children were told to separate. They were given a whole bunch of beads, and they were told to separate them out by color group. Right? Like red, blue, green, yellow, so on and so forth. The Japanese and many first generation Japanese American children separated out pink as its own color group, and light blue as well. But they also included white amongst the lighter blue beads. Right? Whereas the American and second generation Japanese American children put pink in with the red color group, right? And put the light blues with the rest of the blues, right? Purple was thrown in with the blues for the Japanese children, right? So even concepts like color groups are a function of sort of cultural training. How we use them is based off of, is a matter of training, not a matter of fact, right? So if I say something's pink, that doesn't mean it is pink, right? In the same way that you understand it necessarily. It might mean that it's, I don't know, chartreuse. I'm not good with colors. Right? But anyway, functionally, important part of all of this is the idea of nominalism. That language is a matter of training, not a matter of fact. And our language use is a matter of relying on family resemblances, which are a part of how we identify what resembles what is a function of how we are trained to understand certain concepts.